I basically started studying music very early. I started playing drums when I was 5 or 6, and then I studied jazz and composition, and this was kind of during my teenage years, like as a music student. But then my first university studies were on architecture. I did just a few years of that, but I was very interested in acoustics and space and sound, and how sound affects space and how it's kind of designed from the architectural perspective. And this was also when I started to kind of create more artworks and more installation work and experimental music. So in my initial experimental music, I came from drums and other instruments to kind of just use the mixer and materials as a form to create compositions. And I kind of mixed that with what I was interested in, space and architecture. So kind of creating installations that are self-playable instruments and that have a lot of like unpredictability and react to how the space is and how the speakers are positioned and so on. So kind of like my work today is a bit a clash between reaction of materials to sound in a place, which obviously comes a lot from both my music background and architectural background. And it really is kind of, for instance, for this piece, it kind of is a study about how you position certain things and the frequencies. If you put a speaker in one point and a stone in another, just a little deviation from position will make it move in a different way. So it's all about like resonance, and for me that's the most kind of interesting thing about sound, is to observe it as a resonance in all the materials and in the space itself. So every space, every material, every form, shape influences how sound is perceived, and also how sound affects the different constitutions and materials of the place. Rhone is basically an alternative way to give form to a field recording, and most field recorders are kind of concentrated on recording on a location and then just having the audio file from that. And I kind of wanted to extend from that because of this question of the low frequencies. A lot of low frequencies are not perceptible, and the main installation is kind of an alternative way to give response to those frequencies. So if you play, let's say, a 10 Hz frequency through a speaker, you won't listen nothing, but you will see the speaker moving. And basically any speaker is just that. Membrane moves back and forth, and by doing that creates pressure on the air and changes the frequencies you're hearing. So what I do here, technically speaking, is creating a platform, a kind of field where this going up and back movement of sound is not meant to be heard as in a normal speaker, but it's meant to affect materials. So it's kind of a sculptural tool, actually. I use all these kind of infrasound speakers that are intended to just induce vibration on materials, and I position them in different points, so it's a 12 channel, and depending on these points it affects the vibration on the materials, which in this case is gravel and stones. So what you hear is not really the infrasound frequencies, the sound itself, the acoustical sound. What you hear is a response from the materials to that sound. But it's still acoustic perceptible because the stones move and there's all this rumble going on. And also what I do is taking all the field recordings I've done and then rearrange them through this 12 channel, not in any specific order, but just isolating the base infrasound frequencies and then just opposing them. In a tradition or history of field recording, you are normally very real to what you record. You record and you reproduce exactly as it is, and in my case it's totally different. I use it as kind of a source material, to then work upon, but the result is I can manipulate it. So I don't really put too much effects on it, but I can, for instance, have one channel with recordings from day one, and then the channel 2 with recordings from a week after. So I just mix all the bass sounds. There's no effects actually. There's just the only effect is cut because these are not meant to play anything else besides bass frequencies. So I make a cut in everything that is above 30 Hertz. We listen, the lowest is 20. So there's still some bass we can listen, but normally glaciers, earthquakes, volcanoes, they go between 7, 10, 12 Hertz. So the only thing I do is cut these frequencies and the volume, the level. I recorded a lot of hours and I have a lot of content, but then I choose rather randomly like how I'm gonna position that to each speaker under the platform. And that kind of creates this random, non-controllable feeling for me because I don't really know how the platform is going to move all the time. It can become stronger at a specific points and very weak at other points. So I like this kind of, it's not entirely controllable. Yeah. And also because the stones change their position during the development, it's kind of like if you would put a sound composition that is eternally changing, so you cannot really control how the sound will be in the day 1, day 2, the next week, and that is totally opposite from the tradition of field recording, because you have a recording and that recording will be the same every day if you listen this year, next year. So all my works are I try to make that sort of work to create something that is constantly changing and ephemeral and has a degree of randomness or uncontrolled. So I control to a certain degree how the thing is created, but then there is a lot of space for the thing itself to change. My only methodology is not to have a methodology, because I think that to do site-specific work or to do field research, no matter what is the location, it will always be different from place to place. So the place itself is the main dictator of what is the best way to go. So the only rule that I have is if I want to do a research in a place, I can never do it in a short time. There cannot be a 1 week or 2 week research. So normally my residencies or periods of work in the field go from 3 months to 6 months, or sometimes more. I just try to have as much time as I can to research, and then with the work and with the process and with the experience of being there, I see what happens. A lot of people kind of do location work with the concept before that, so they have an idea for something they want to research, and they go to that place to research on that. And normally I just choose the place kind of almost not randomly, but just has this initial interest, and then all the concept work and research and investigation comes after being that place. The installation part, it always comes after, because it's always like somehow is a practical response to problems that or situations that appear from the place. In the case of Rhone, I went initially to just make like a research work about the Rhone Valley, which also includes the lake Lac Léman, which is the area of Geneva, and I wanted to make a lot of different recordings around that area. And then I just went like hiking to the Rhone Glacier, and I really liked the place and the caves they have there, like in the ice. And only after that I started researching, and I discovered that it used to be the biggest one in Europe, and all the little details about how it's disappearing. There's also like they're trying to cover the glacier to make it melt slower. So all these things kind of appeared afterwards. But I think it's really just an exercise of trying not to force nothing to the location and being as patient as you can be. And for me that's super important, because in the rest of my work, when I have to present exhibitions and finalized pieces, it's all about like rush and rules and times, you know, like agendas and dates. So I kind of, in the field work, I allow myself to experience and to be patient and to let things come. For me, the most important thing about art is that it doesn't serve any purpose. So science, technology, and different areas often they need to provide an outcome. They need to provide an answer. And for me, the most important thing, or that differentiates art from that, is that there is no outcome. An artwork doesn't have to feed any area or give any replies or any solutions to any problem. So in a certain way, like, my work is not gonna improve or do any big difference to any areas, but I see it as a whole. Like, I get a lot of influence from scientific research, but also from other kinds of research, and for me it depends on the project what is more important and less important. And what I often do is I do my piece, but if there's side parts of my work that I can give to other people, for instance in Rhone I had collaborations with scientists that were doing their own thing, and we just would go the same day and they would tell me about locations and so on. And they were doing their thing and I was doing mine. But often I can give my recordings, for instance, to data. And that is actually quite more and more important these days. Like bioacoustics is sort of field recordings designed to measure different aspects of nature, like biomass, different species, and it has a lot of advantages, because with good recordings you can have information from all different directions, and they are quite easy to set. So there are a lot of scientists that use bioacoustics and microphones put in forests and different locations to know if certain species have been increasing in quantity, if they pass through this place, and they kind of use that for scientific mapping of the region, biologists and so on. So when I do like field recordings that can help these programs, often I give this data to them, but not as an artwork. So this is kind of a side effect, exactly. So I don't really see this kind of merging art and science together. I mean, I think art is and will always be a mix of a lot of different fields, and you can use a lot of knowledge from different areas to do your work, and I think that's good. But it's really different from science. I think the change towards environmental problems will only happen when people kind of by themselves develop a more close relation with the place, and it will depend also a lot about politics and rules and real changes on laws. And I think there's a place for activism, which I can be part of and help and take a lot of action as a citizen. But in the arts realm, I'm more comfortable with the thing of having no purpose. So if you want to see an artwork and that gets you inspired to be more active and to have a change, that's totally fine. If you want to see it as just an aesthetic experience and sound acoustic experience, that's also fine for me. So it's up to the viewer to see what kind of outcomes it gets. Mm-hmm. But I don't really believe that one artist or a few artworks can make massive differences. I believe that laws and global activism can, and yeah, and it's a little part of it, of course. I think people have the tendency to divide everything to categories because it's easier for them to explain the reason why someone would do something if they can say, well, it's a biologist or it's archaeologist or it's, and what happens in the case of artists most times is like people don't really understand, well, why you do that. There's no reason to do that. And most people find that having no reason to do something is bad. And the thing is, I don't. I think there's a lot of things in the world that have no reason, and they are still super interesting and beautiful. I'm not quite sure if these would be felt in this piece, but for instance, infrasound is known to induce feelings of anxiety, fear, a lot of negative panic feelings on the human beings. They have made several tests and scientific proofs of that, and I'm quite interested in that, and also because it's a very animalistic biological effect. So the reason why we feel fear with that is because mostly when infrasound is created is either an earthquake or a volcano or some kind of disaster or cataclysm. So through evolution we became our body reacts biological to those frequencies. And that is really interesting. I mean, we come a long way to separate from nature and to have our cities and our technology and all that, but there's still a lot of like very basic biological effects of sound on the mind and on the body itself. And I don't think I ever made any piece that I'm really intending to a specific effect on the human body. Maybe in the future, yes, but in this case, for instance, there's definitely infrasound frequencies produced, but if people are going to have anxiety or not, yeah, I'm not quite sure, maybe not. In the case of the Rhone glacier, I definitely want to come back. The main reason is because I would say 80 to 90% of the recordings I've done were really on the bottom of the glacier, where you have several tunnels. So this part is just expected to retreat, so disappear in the next 5-10 years. You have a lot of image documentation of how the glacier used to be. So it used to be way longer, not so long ago. So it's retreating really fast. And for instance, I would say more than half of the locations where I was recording that existed, and also they are not only part of the sounds, but there's images that I filmed there. These spaces will disappear very soon. It just opens up your imagination in a sense. Like I'm Portuguese, and when you're in high school, you're always told about how like inspiring it was to just sail on a boat not knowing what will be in the next field. And I think that is something that is really powerful for humans, for the human mind, to have space and imagination to go beyond something you know. Mostly sculpture is trying to keep a three-dimensional object static in space and time. So you create this monolith, this representation, this granitic sculpture, and what people try to do is that they visualize this image and then they try to have this image static. So you still, today you can still see a sculpture of David from Michelangelo and so on. So it's an exercise of trying to maintain an object or image intact through time. And my work is the right opposite. Everything I try to do is to make something change through time. So if it's a static object or if it's something that can be repeated, then I'm not interested in. So for me, the sculpture is not so much the object, but it's the change that happens on the object during the course of the exhibition. And that's why sound is so important, because sound lives from this kind of movement of materials, and it's a very temporal, it's time-dependent kind of medium. today you have a lot of people whose job is to keep intact the paintings on a museum. So the paintings are kind of trying to change their form, so they are decaying and becoming something else, because that's how nature is. And someone is in charge of keeping them in their pristine form. So art is all about, or most art is all about that, and looking at the object that is inchangeable. And I try to work with the degrading of the object, so with changing it, and in that sense it's different, it's very different. I obviously work in the media art context mostly, and the media art context it's a very highly technological one. There's a lot of digital processing, computer work and all that, and my work is a bit different than that, because it's very analog and basic in terms of the technology, and it's mostly an opposition between something that is very rough, raw and organic, material speaking, with some sort of medium which is technological. And what I like to do is to create a dialogue where not only the organic part is uncontrollable, but also the technological part has a bit of like some kind of animalistic feeling to it. So I dispose the speakers or whatever I'm using in a way that is not entirely controllable or entirely defined, and then technology or the technical elements of it also behave a bit unpredictably. So it looks like a bit of a game, from two parts that mutually influence each other. Everything is technology. If you're using a hammer and two nails, it's technology. Every tool is a tool designed by human beings to interact, to create a certain thing. And in my work, for instance, if you mean advanced technology, in my work I use it's very limited. Sound technology, like the way speakers are built and microphones, is one of the things that has evolved the least in the last decades. Like the way we make speakers and the way we amplify things is still pretty much the same. So mostly what I use is analog electric speakers and things like this in my works, or very basic microphones that I even build. So I try to just use technology as a tool that serves me for a specific work at a time, and not be focused on the technology itself, which I think is a big problem of media art. Is that sometimes people they fall more in love with the tool than the purpose of the tool. So they kind of create this work which is about all this data and all these channels and all these things, and the work becomes more about that medium than what's the content of it. I think technology can be fundamental for making it easier to understand a specific thing or to create a specific object, but you should always be focused on that object or on that thing. And for me it's not very important like to use an advanced way of, if I can do a work and it's a very basic technology, it's fine for me.